Hello and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. It is Friday. It is 8 p.m. UK time. It's the 13th of March, and we are still in the month of prophecies. So this is the second installment. So we're going to have another 2 shows on prophecies. So the way that it works is I'm just going to do a quick intro, and then we do some news, a little bit on the Quran, a little bit of this and this, and then we're going to be spending a lot of time on different prophecies. I want to welcome everybody in the chat. Hello, wonderful people out there listening to the Gin and Tonic Show. And welcome also to the people who are watching this later, who are not in the live stream at the moment. So you can watch it live on YouTube and on Facebook on the Gin and Tonic Show. Thank you very much for being with me today on the panel. Scholars haven't arrived yet. No minus, no thumbs down yet. Thank you, gentlemen. Lady does know Faye, the gracious, is not gracing us with her presence today. So there's only men here today. How boring. Welcome, James, and welcome, Levi or Levi, Levi Cohen, and Rob, the Speaker's Corner UK representative. Good evening, gents. How are you?
Good evening, Stubbs. It's good to be here again.
Evening, lads, and evening, everybody watching.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. I am your friendly neighborhood, Mr. Levi Cohen. I am the fake ex-Muslim who's actually a Jew imposter who's trying to be a fake ex-Muslim. So says every Muslim out there. And Mohammed, thank you for Mr. Levi Cohen. I've taken this from you, so that's my name tonight.
Okay, we're going to be talking about prophecies tonight. And next month, I think we're going to be talking about slavery because there's so much happening. Okay, what we do is we live broadcast. And if you want to interact, you have 3 different possibilities. You can either come to the chat and just type messages. You can question, comment, ask, whatever. Or you can come and join us on the panel. And but then this is verbal, all right? The one is typing and on the panel is verbal, or you can watch it later on. And then you can type questions or something into the comments, which of course I have forgotten again to do for last week, which I always want to be doing before I come here, but I forgot. Okay, we focus on Islam because we know more about Islam than we do about other ideologies. At least this goes for me. We address Islam, we critique, we don't attack. And we don't attack individual Muslims because most of the time, Muslims are actually the ones who are the victims. Not always, but they're not always the guilty ones. A lot of times they're just brainwashed, they're conditioned to react the way that they do. So I'm not always angry with them because I understand that there is a mental issue and this is not always their fault. Anyway, we try and use facts, reality, and reasoning to help people understand Islam today in the 21st century. Doing that, we categorically condemn any kind of abuse, any kind of oppression, misogyny, any kind of slavery or violence. And whether it's in the Quran or whether it's anywhere, it doesn't matter. It's strongly condemned. We use free speech and free expression. We welcome factual and constructive criticism, because this is the only way that we think that you can update information and update knowledge in people. Now, we try and just be decent human beings. So if you want to comment, question, correct, or you're simply curious about anything Islam, you've come to the right place. Because we let the Quran speak for itself. We don't use thousands of people, scholars or not or whatever, who commented on this book and its vague and ambiguous sentences hundreds of years after it was allegedly started. We will acknowledge their existence, but normally we try and focus only on the Quran. Don't go and try and pay us. Don't go to Patreon or PayPal. We don't want your money. So there you go. Okay, what we are going to do is we're going to start with some news. Oh, and by the way, this is again, if you want to join us later, there's a fourth avenue that I had forgotten, because if this is not enough Islam for you, you can join us in the after show on Discord. You will find this link underneath there in the scrolling ticker box, and we will put it into the chat at a later point. So in the news today, I want to start off with what obviously with Corona. Because what I said is, it seems that real problems require real solutions and not imaginary gods. And either the gods can't help with Corona, which means they're impotent, or they don't know how to help, which makes them ignorant and foolish, or they don't want to help, which makes them cruel bastards. Now, on the other hand, scientists, they know how to help, they can help, and they will help. That is the difference. Now, let me just do a sidetrack here, because James has been wonderful and did some background work here on what Muhammad said, because Muhammad was amazing when it comes to these different these different ailments and cures and things like that. So let's see, James, what have you found out?
Yeah, I found a lot of very interesting kind of wonderful knowledge.
Levy, can you mute, because we're getting a lot of feedback from you? Thank you.
Okie dokie. I'm sharing my screen. Can we? So this is the first thing that Mohammed. Let me make the sort of. Okay, is that visible to you guys?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So from Sunan Abi Dawud, narrated Abdullah ibn Abbas, the Prophet said, "If anyone visits a sick, supposedly sick man, whose time has not come, and says with him 7 times, 'I ask Allah the Mighty, the Lord of the Mighty Throne, to cure you,' Allah will cure him from that disease." So this is from Sunan Abi Dawud, 3106, rated Sahih. And just to make sure this isn't a one-off hadith, this is also reported in Abu Dawud and at Tirmidhi. The same advice again, Ibn Abbas reported. The Prophet said, "He who visits a sick person who is not on the point of death and supplicates 7 times, saying this Arabic prayer here, Asul-Lalar, Azima, Rabal, Arshil, Azimi, An Yashfiyaka," yeah, etc., etc., Allah will certainly heal him from that sickness. So yeah, clearly everyone must be being healed, and they're just hiding it. Clearly, kind of the Muslims are keeping this cure-all method secret from us non-Muslims. So that's the reason why kind of we haven't ever heard of this way of curing all disease before.
Presumably, though, that doesn't include missing limbs or anything else.
Well, it says it'll heal him from that sickness. So at the very least, we'd expect them to survive. So clearly this must be going on. You know, it's not as if Muhammad would make up bullshit and lie to us and, you know, spread misinformation like a witch doctor, claiming that it's knowledge of the unseen from a made-up gods that he imagined. So clearly this is true, and all the Muslims are kind of healing all their kind of coronavirus victims using this method, and they're just keeping it secret and under wraps.
Well, again, we could put them under observation. Hey, with the scientific equipment we have, and they can do this 7 times, and we can witness it happening there and then. That would be pretty miraculous, I would imagine.
Yeah,
I would think as well, if the coronavirus was spread by the fly, because the fly has the coronavirus under one wing, and under the other wing is the cure to coronavirus, not only would you get coronavirus at a moment, but you're instantly healed too, as long as you dip the whole fly in the food that you're eating. So there's another way of testing it.
Yeah.
So if there's a Muslim who wants to come and explain to us why they've closed Mecca and Medina, why it is that Muslims, Sunni Muslims, cannot rely on their own Sunnah, please explain this to us. You're welcome to come here and tell us this is the reason why Muslims, the the clerics themselves, the scholars, don't rely on this method. If this is so clearly stated in the sunnah.com, because it's certainly, Allah will certainly heal him from that sickness. Why is this not being applied? Why don't Muslims themselves, Sunni Muslims, trust this method? Please come and explain this.
Do we have time for one more kind of hadith relating to disease practices and corona and that sort of thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this was also brought up last week, but there's the wonderful story, the wonderful medical advice reported in many different hadith books. I'm showing Sahih Muslim, saying Abu Hurairah reported Allah's messenger as saying, "There is no infection and no safar and no hammer." These are both Arabic words for Arabian superstitions like safar and hammer, which they didn't bother translating. A desert Arab said, "Allah's messenger, how is it that when the camel is in the sand, it is like a deer, then a camel afflicted with scab mixes with it, and it is also affected by the scab?" They haven't even written this correctly. There's a big typo here. But then the Holy Prophet, said, "Well, then who infected the first one?" So this might seem a bit poor grammar, so it might seem unclear what he's talking about. We can make it perfectly clear what's being said by looking at the same story reported this time in Jami at-Tirmidhi, also graded Sahih, Arabic reference, book 32, Hadith 2293, where it says, Ibn Masud, so a different companion of Muhammad, also reported that the Messenger of Allah stood among us and said, "One thing does not infect another," i.e. there is no infection, there's no contagious transmission of disease. So a Bedouin said, "O Messenger of Allah, if a camel gets mangy glands and we leave it at a resting place of camels, then all of the camels get mange?" The Messenger of Allah said, "Who caused the first to get mange? There is no adwa," this is the Arabic word meaning contagion or infection, adwa, "nor safar. Allah created every soul, so he wrote its life, its provision, and its afflictions." So, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is when you have, somebody who's probably schizophrenic making medical diagnoses.
Mm. And being corrected by his own, the people around him, saying, he's got all these followers who really trust him, and even they're calling him out and saying, "Hold on, guy, that's probably not true, is it?" And he's still kind of doubling down, being like, no, it's even if you keep a sick camel with other camels and the rest get sick, that was just written down in their destiny, because Allah created every soul and he wrote its life and all the diseases it would get. So no, there is no contagious transmission of a disease. One thing does not infect another. So he really had
that's
problems.
demonstrably false. But hey,
Yeah.
Who's going to accept the Sahih Hadith when it doesn't suit them, right?
Yeah. I mean, people are tempted not to accept these reports and say, it was written down later on, and so they aren't credible. But when you're looking at historical sources, in order to judge whether a source is credible, one of the things you look at is called the criteria of embarrassment. Like, how embarrassing is a particular source for the side that recorded it? And so obviously this is extremely embarrassing for Muslims. So they'd only have reason to record this if they kind of really thought that it actually happened. So it was so kind of undeniable that they couldn't just edit it out or try and smother it or that kind of thing. So this actually makes it kind of quite credible that this guy really was claiming these absurd witch doctor kind of patently false things. And furthermore, he's clearly claiming sort of divine knowledge for it. He's not just saying I might be fallible, but in my opinion there's no such thing as a contagious disease. He's using his prophetly sort of authority to say kind of Allah created every soul, so he wrote its life and its provision and its afflictions. So he's clearly here, he's kind of saying, no, I know about because I know about how Allah works, I know that there is no kind of contagious transmission of disease, because of the fact that Allah, wrote this record of everything that will happen in a creature's life. And so, it's a very big mistake, and should show you what kind of a person he was.
But it also, as one of the commenters pointed out, right, that seems to suggest that Allah predetermined things. So praying 7 times would be completely useless if you had free will, because obviously if Allah's determined things and you pray 7 times and He's already determined whether you're going to be, healed or not, then it's completely pointless. So it's sort of a bit of a contradiction there, but that's not unusual.
Yeah, it's far from unusual.
Yeah.
With
And the pen has already written it down anyway, so yeah. And I created
you've forgotten the other miracle as well, that can protect you from coronavirus, as found in the hadith. I didn't know if you was going to bring this out, James, so I apologize if I've stolen your thunder. But then there's the miracle of the 7 Ajwan dates. If you eat them, nothing can touch you that day.
Yeah, that cures all poison if you eat the 7 Arabian dates from Medina, the 7 Ajwa dates for in the morning. That'll protect you from all poison that day.
Which is what Tottenham Hotspur fans and Tottenham Hotspur team should be eating Sunday, but they can't eat them Sunday because they've cancelled all the Premier League football games till April.
What are you going to do with yourself on the Sunday? Go down the speaker's corner and get infected there.
I don't know what I'm going to do, but not watch football.
But then again, if you're a Muslim, you'd say, well, you'd suddenly get this nuance around poison. Well, what is poison? How do we determine what is poison? No, that thing that killed somebody, that's not poison. That's just something else, right? That's the other thing that I find. As soon as you bring up something like this, suddenly the nuance wants to kick in. But when you point out a nuance, well, you're just nitpicking, right? It's just the double standards are just fascinating. Go on then, stop, or James.
I'm just looking at a post on Facebook where a group called Quran and Science Perfectly says about the coronavirus. Abu Huraira quoted Muhammad saying, "Utilize the black seed, for without a doubt it is a cure for all sickness aside from death." And this is Al-Bukhari 7,591. So this is what Muslims themselves are saying. This is what Muslims themselves are quoting. So they are very much aware of these sentences, of these sayings, of these fairy tales. And they are quoting them, and at the same time, they are avoiding everything and going to the kuffar hospital. And this for me is so weird that they themselves are praying and hoping and doing and pretending as though there is something there. And then they themselves go and say, well, no, not really, actually.
No, they're hedging their bets, right? We'll pray, and if that doesn't work, we'll go to the hospital in at least one of those 2 ways. And if they still die, oh well, that was predestined anyway, so we didn't have to bother with any of it.
Allah knows best.
And there's something in tonight's Quran reading that I've just realized with what you're saying there about seeking protection and such, because it says in the Quran, I'll say this now if it's right, because I didn't write it down in my notes, but it says, do not take the awliya, that's what it's in my translation, or non-believers basically as protectors or friends. So a Muslim shouldn't really go to the hospital in order to get protection from coronavirus, because those are unbelievers and they're going to protect you from it. So a Muslim should not use a hospital because those are unbelievers.
Yeah, they definitely are your protectors and benefactors if you do that.
And claiming benefits, shouldn't protect you from any financial insecurities either.
I created my own hadith, or my own saying, the hadith according to Stubbs, and that is, I have a T-shirt. I really have this T-shirt, which says, the wearer of this T-shirt is a doctor. Now lie back, relax, and do everything the nice doctor tells you to do.
And they won't ask for any qualifications, right?
No, the girls liked it. Because they said, are you really a doctor? Because then they've got an excuse. So it was great. let me go to.
I think they went over some people's heads in the chat. Probably.
That's okay. I'll hear it later. Let's go to the news. I've already given you some news about the coronavirus, but let's get away from the virus a little bit, because Paul McGowan wrote in January 2020, I wrote about the results of a survey I had done in which I presented 4 questions to 80 Muslim public officials across the United States. Now, each question asked the Muslim public official to choose between the following: the US Constitution, in other words, our man-made laws, or Islamic doctrine. And he says an eye-opening 93% of these Muslim public officials would not express support for the US Constitution or our man-made laws. And of the 6 who did express this support, only 2 allowed me to mention their name. So in other words, 80 Muslim public officials working for the United States government, working for the people of the United States, will not support the US Constitution over Sharia. This is quite amazing.
Well, but then this is where they contradict themselves with that, because when it comes to Muslims that are fast leaving Islam, if they're going to put the Sharia above the Constitution, then why aren't Muslim ex-Muslim apostates being killed in America? That's what the command is, you see. So that it's very selective in the way that they select that. You know, so you either obey the Sharia or you don't. There is no picking at it like salt out of pepper. But the Muslims that are making that statement, when they're confronted with an ex-Muslim, won't take it in their own hands to do it. They'll find some kind of lame excuse, which has been my argument against Muslims in this country when I'm face to face with them. That's exactly what they do. They're very selective. They'll turn around and say things, well, you've got to be in a Sharia controlled country, it's got to be decided by a Sharia court of law. That's not true. There is no criteria in any Islamic tradition that says that it's got to be done in an Islamic controlled country, or it's got to be decided by an Islamic Sharia court. If a person, it says there quite clearly, if a person leaves his religion, kill him. Simple as that. There is no alternative or judicial system that one has to face for that. So this is where my argument is, because it's when you look at, say, other scriptures, it clearly says things like, you know, Caesar's things to Caesar, God's things to God. So there is a criteria. You know, there are other ones: be lawful to Caesar, or be obedient to Caesar, and whatnot. So there are commands in other scriptures to be obedient to the man-made governments, but not in Islamic parlance. There is no criteria.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not in Islam. We know that Islam does not have the separation of religion and state. Same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, the second item that I've chosen is pretty arbitrary, and maybe it's a bit personal, because there's a video by our friend Ahmed, the Maverick, in Speaker's Corner. I've got the link here. I don't know if I should put this in the. Yeah, let me be correct, and let me put this into the chats, into both Facebook and YouTube. So if you want to watch it, there it is. Now this is it's actually quite amazing, because he displays, and what is even more telling, the comments on that video, because this reflects it very well, and it shows you everything that is wrong with Islam in the 21st century. It shows how Islam indoctrinates people to bring out the worst in human beings, this inhumane factor. And he only has lies and deceit to whitewash his beloved book. He was shown how horrible the hadiths, the sayings, thoughts, and actions of Islam's main messenger, how horrible this was. And he changed to Quran only, thinking this would save him, or at least make things better. But now it's even worse, which is obvious to anyone who's actually read the Quran. And the point is, he's not showing that something is actively prohibited, like beating your wife. It doesn't say in the Quran, don't beat your wife or wives in the case of Islam. But he can only whine and manipulate words that are there to make them seem something else. which will not fit in with the rest of the book. So many sentences refer to others to make a point, and this is what he screws up. Much like if you take a strong medication against something, this requires in turn medication for the side effects, which in turn needs medication for the side effects of the side, and so on. And this is sad, because this is still happening today. And he is like totally convinced that what he's doing is perfectly okay, perfectly all right, and it actually makes sense when it doesn't. Any comments on this?
Well, frequently it's said that Islam doesn't belong in the 21st century, or I think one of the comments last month about the misogyny was, well, in this day and age, Islam should move forward towards its attitudes towards women. My argument is Islam never belonged in any century. There's never been a period of time where Islam actually belonged. There was never a good period where we can't turn around and say things like, well, it was okay then, but it was okay then because it was a different world, but it should be outlawed now. It should have been outlawed then as well. There was never a period of time where any feature of Islam belonged. It benefited no society at any one given time. And if anybody wants proof of that, look at Arabian history, pre-Muhammad, then post-Muhammad. There's your testimony that Islam has never had a period wherever it belonged.
Yeah. And then finally,
say on like Ahmed's sort of, I agree with what you said about kind of how like often the normal way that if you're a Muslim and you're shown something kind of awful in the Quran, is the way you'll try and diffuse that is you'll try and look for something in the history, something that a scholar said or something that one of the companions said, and you'll try and say, oh no, it was only kind of self-defensive. But since Ahmed's kind of ruled that out, kind of if you show him a verse like kind of chapter 9 verse 29, fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, and do not consider unlawful what Allah and his messengers have made unlawful, and who do not adopt the religion of truth from those who are given the scripture, fight until they give the jizya willingly while they are humbled. Kind of that there is no way that you can read that and try and say that this isn't a command to fight people based on their religious beliefs. So that this is, and the thing is that even for mainstream kind of Muslims, if they try and like look at the history of Muhammad's life, they'll find again that this is only that Muhammad kind of waged war in order to spread his religion, not kind of just in self-defense. So I mean, both ways that they're kind of their thesis, the thing that they want to show, is, if they're trying to defend this, isn't borne out by the evidence. But Ahmed's kind of, I mean, the person who's kind of going to allow kind of historical reports and so on, might be able to kind of focus on a narrow range of reports or that sort of thing. Whereas like this verse kind of is very straightforward in how kind of offensive it is. So there isn't any way to kind of defend the Quran really at all.
Well, actually, that's why you have modern day miracles now, like rhetorical devices, or you haven't read it in Arabic, you haven't read it in Quranic Arabic, you've taken it out of context. So the usual tropes are forwarded to suggest that the kuffar, the non-believer, has no understanding of what Quranic etymology is. Hence why we come to the conclusions that we do. Yet this is a book made simple, a book easy to understand.
And at the moment, Reanimator is making a good point, because what is strange is that even somebody like Ahmed will take the knowledge that he has of and about Muhammad. Oh, okay, exactly this one, and somehow base everything on this, because there's nothing about Muhammad in the Quran. So you have to go to secondary sources. You have to go to the Sunnah. You have to go to either the Sirah or the Hadith or both or whatever to get any kind of information. Now, there is nothing in the Quran about women, how they should cover themselves, which is why you have such a huge variety of coverings for women. There is nothing in the Quran that alcohol is prohibited, that music is prohibited, and all these things. They're not there. They come in the Hadith. And therefore, if you have anything like that, there is no way that you can ignore that. So it's quite funny, because you have to be consistent, and they're not.
I asked you, remember, Stops, I was saying to you, it'd be interesting to have a Muslim who accepts the hadith and the sunnah and the Sahaba, and etc., debate a Quranist, right? Because that Muslim will ask all of
they
those
kill
questions.
each other.
Right?
They're at each other's throats. They say both are not real Muslims.
Yeah, and I think if we look at it, the four of us, we'd probably have to say, well, you couldn't get all this information without appealing to the hadith and the sunnah, right? As you've pointed out.
Exactly.
That's what we discussed the other week, when it makes a statement when Allah and his messenger have decided upon a matter. I forget what the verse was it last week or the week before, where Allah is basically saying, if you want to go further, you need to speak to Muhammad. Well, if the Quran is the word of Allah, and Allah is telling you you need to go and see what Muhammad says, Allah is telling you go see the hadith.
Yeah, exactly. This is the problem.
And if people are looking at prophecy, and prophecy is also something that comes from the hadith, then you've got no choice but to go to the hadith to get those prophecies, because there's hardly any in the Quran in comparison to what's in the hadith.
Levi Cohen. That's, if you listen to what the Quranists say, the thing, okay, I got an advantage here because I spent like a year on Free Minds because I was fascinated by this, and they are Quranists. They say that the Quran says, go look at the hadith, where hadith is the Quran. So there's a circular reasoning here that there is no way to be 100% sure that the Quran says go look at the secondary literature or second whatever point, or what Muhammad said.
But my argument to that is that means the past 1300 years of Islam has been false and fake. And yet Muhammad himself said that the first 3 or 4 generations are the purest of Islam.
Again, you have the people saying this is not true because they were written down right in the beginning. It's just the compilation was 300 years later. So there's always excuses. Okay, let's get through. Third item. I took something in the UK, a news item, because it says there is something grimly ironic about the Labour Party's decision to suspend Trevor Phillips from its membership on the grounds of Islamophobia. Now, if you don't know who Trevor Phillips was, he was the guy who helped introduce and popularize this bogus word, this is what they call it, and the fraudulent concept. And he, in the first place, this was him. So now he is being chucked exactly for this.
I thought he was being chucked because he kind of commissioned that report in the UK that compared how well sort of different religious groups were sort of assimilating and integrating. And he kind of commented after the report was finished that, you know, that there is a difference, there's a significant difference with how, you know, Muslim immigrants are sort of joining in with society and integrating and assimilating with the wider kind of social community and so on, versus with other kind of religious groups. And yeah, he kind of pointed that, you know, that it's not as if like, oh, it's all the same. And I thought that's what he kind of got under fire for, which seems really ridiculous and awful.
Well, it's called Islamophobia. Anyway, they say that in '97 there was a think tank which Phillips chaired, published a report titled Islamophobia, a Challenge for Us All, assessing the state of race relations and specifically looking at the question of the hostile attitude toward Muslims. And it concludes, the episode is a reminder of the dangers of censorship, of trying to shut down debate through censure, through fright words. And I like this, fright words, like Islamophobia, where Islamophobia is defined as a fright word. I love it. And this is a dangerous and stupid concept in '97, and it still is now. So there you go.
Are we having any guests on at all, Stops?
Well, at the moment, we still need to go through something to discuss because we're only starting on the prophecies now. Because up until now, this was just news. There's nothing.
No. The only reason why is because Oscar Moore says he's a Quranist and he can, quote unquote, simplify it. So, but that might
would be
take
great. Do you have like a little bit of time to stick around? Because it would be interesting to have you on, or we just go and put the prophecies on the back burner, and give you 10 minutes to quickly. Let's do that. Let's do that. I mean, it's not often that we have a Quranist here. So if you want to
Well,
come
let's
on,
just, I think maybe stops. I mean, obviously, James and everybody's prepared a few things. So I
yes,
just
no,
wonder
just
how
10
long you'll
minutes.
be on for.
No, just 10 minutes, just a sidetrack.
I don't mind waiting, because if we've got an opportunity to have a Muslim on the show, then I think we should. My opinion is, let's get him on.
Yeah, sounds good.
Because James Speaker's Corner has, he's done most of it. Okay, listen. No, we've got it twice. All right, Oscar Boy, just come on and explain this concept, what we've just talked about, and explain it to us if you can. That would be great. But please bear with us that we don't want to spend more than 10 minutes as a side issue here, right? So this is just, if you could explain it to us, that would be great. But what we don't want is to spend the rest of the show talking about this, because we've got a lot of stuff going today with the topic of prophecies. Okay, so this is great. Should we start? Because I can see that he's not on yet. So I don't know if he needs to prepare or if he needs to plug in a microphone or something. I don't know.
Have you still got news items, or what's the next?
No, I was just going to go now into the prophecies, where we said last time, where we defined it, where we said the prophecy versus a prediction or a forecast, and we had the 3 P's of prophecies, which is precision, precision, precision. And I found another definition, because remember we went through our era's 5 points. Here I have 5 points by an atheist. No, that's the wrong one, of course. This one here.
Just make your screen full.
I need to, yeah.
There you go.
And I need to take out my name, which I do here. All right. So this is a Douglas Kruger, who writes, because he wrote a book, What is Atheism? A Short Introduction. And he writes there on prophecies some criteria I needed in order to distinguish cases of lucky guesses from those of true prophecy. Let us define a yes, this is the stupid thing. How can I make this longer?
That fits fine. Oh, is there more than 5
No,
points?
because there's a timer which always wants to change it to the next one. And the timer is set at something like 20 seconds or 30 seconds. And I don't know how to bloody well stop it.
What is it that
Can
you're
I
running
stop
though?
it?
Is it some sort of like
Okay, there we
revolving
go.
thing? Okay.
So some criteria needed, and he says, number 1, and I think this makes a lot of sense, the prophecy must be clear, and it must contain sufficient detail to make its fulfillment by a wide variety of possible events unlikely. And I think this is the most important one. It must be clear with sufficient detail to make its fulfillment unlikely. So if you have a wide variety of possible events, it's unlikely that all of them come together if you don't know what you're talking about. The second point that he makes is the event that can fulfill the prophecy must be unusual or unique. Like what I said last time, if I say it's going to rain in July in London, this is not unusual or unique. The prophecy must be known to have been made before the event that is supposed to be its fulfillment. And that's where most
I think that's pretty important, right?
Yeah, but remember, Muslims bring up the war, the battle, which obviously happened during the lifetime. And yet people are telling us that this is a prophecy, which is not. Number 4, he says, the event foretold must not be the sort that could be the result of an educated guess. In other words, it's going to rain in London in July. Well, okay, doesn't take much. And then finally, the event that fulfills the prophecy cannot be staged. This is what I said. If I order a glass of water from a waiter, I can't say I prophesize that there's going to be a glass of water in front of me within the next 5 minutes. So the event that fulfills the prophecy cannot be staged or the relevant circumstances manipulated by those aware of the prophecy in such a way as to intentionally cause the prophecy to be fulfilled. Now, those, they make a lot of sense in my eyes, those 5 points. So if I take those, I think then if we apply them to the various prophecy claims that we see in Quran and in hadith, a lot of them fall by the wayside. So I want to give a quick example.
Is there any that don't?
Well, I want to give an example of a prophecy which is specific, made by Muhammad. So it's in, at the moment, Bukhari.com is down. Okay, so there's no more money. It's the petrol price is a delight at the moment, but it means that KSA doesn't have money to support things like Bukhari.com. So it's more difficult to find stuff on Sunnah.com. Anyway, so in the Book of Tribulations and Portents of the Last Hour, we have a chapter which is called The Approach of the Hour. And now we go to Sahih Muslim in book 54, hadith number 174. Hang on, I've got this somewhere.
Isn't it on Quran X or?
We can read along with me. There you go. Anas bin Malik reported that a person asked Allah's apostle, when would the last hour come? It's a very specific question. And thereupon Allah's messenger kept quiet for a while, and then looked at a young boy in his presence belonging to the tribe of Ashanwa, and he said, if this boy lives, he would not grow very old till the last hour would come to you. And Anas said that this young boy was of our age during those days. So in other words, this is a very specific, accurate, precise prediction that the last hour will come before this boy dies. So if this boy lives like for 80 years or something, that will be the last hour. So in other words, this is a prediction which Muhammad made, which is relatively precise. It's not something that you can find just by chance or something like this. The only problem is it's wrong because it hasn't happened. So these people died, and this is the same as what you have in the Christian Bible. They also say, well, you know, within the next 25 years, Jesus is going to return, which he didn't. So we have a very, very similar problem here that Muhammad said it's going to be very soon, very quick, and it's not.
Well, I'm not sure that's so precise, Stops. It could have been a lot more precise, but what it is certainly is falsifiable, right? Same claim as they make with the fitra. That's a falsifiable claim, because all we need to find is a group of people that never believed in a sort of God, and then the fitra claim is refuted. But it's the same with this, right? But as you point out, any claim that's made that's actually falsifiable is in fact falsified, which doesn't leave a good track record.
Correct, yeah. And the funny thing is there's more of these, because you have the same thing in this book where Aisha reported that when the desert Arabs came to Allah's messenger, they asked about the last hour, and he looked towards the youngest amongst them and said, if he lives, he would not grow very old, that he would find your last hour coming to you, he would see you dying. And as to when the last hour would come, he had in his presence a young boy who was called Muhammad, and Allah's messenger said, if this young boy lives, he may not grow very old, and you would see the last hour coming. So you can look this up. This is a wonderful page. There's, I don't know how many of these. Let me put this in here this is the link that you can use to find all these things on sunnah.com.
Yeah, you'll find lots of very interesting ones if you Google the hour, just on Sunnah.com.
Exactly.
All the fun kind of prophecies of things that will happen.
And
yeah, that one wouldn't qualify. That wouldn't qualify, unfortunately, according to the 5 criteria there.
All right. Well, it looks like the last Murak doesn't have the technical capabilities to come and join us. So, James Speaker's Corner, off you go.
Okie dokie. So, yeah, I found, I think what would be kind of good to show the audience is that the Muslim apologists who kind of try and convince people that Islam is true, like, for example, IARA, the Islamic education or something or other organization, research organization, association, all that sort of thing. Like these various kind of proselytizing groups, what they'll do is they'll look through kind of mainly the sort of hadith, mainly the reports about Muhammad, things that he said and did, and they'll look through thousands of them in order to find a few that are sort of sound vaguely similar to events that are currently happening. And so in order to show like that, but what they didn't realize is that, and they'll show you the ones that sound like, they're vaguely similar, but what you won't realize is that kind of Muhammad had a particular mechanism for generating these miraculous prophecies about what would happen in the future. Basically, kind of virtually all of his reported prophecies are saying, before the last hour, before the end of the world, X will be, and he'll say something will be the opposite from the way that thing normally is. So, for example, but the world before the last hour, the rain will be hot, and the mountains will move, and the sun will rise in the west. Is it west? Yeah, and so each time he just kind of takes some phenomena and then says somehow it will be the opposite to the way it is now. And so when you realize this, you realize kind of like if you say a million, hundreds of these random assertions, kind of at least one of them, if you kind of like, sort of stretch, kind of squint at it, it will kind of vaguely resemble something that's happening today. And in order to kind of really show this, there's a good video from an excellent YouTube channel called Vidu Vids, featuring Hassan Radwan. And so is it possible to play that, Stops? Yeah, so let's just listen to this for the next few minutes.
A statement like that doesn't really mean anything.
Rain becomes burning or acidic. Acid rain.
Rain becomes acidic. Well, how?
Actually, it doesn't say acidic. The actual word is.
Yep. Hot.
His reading into it acidic. Yes, it's qaydan, which means hot.
Hot.
Har. It's hot. Harara. He's adding the acidic bit.
So this is another interesting point. Is that it says. So maybe this is rain is sort of cooling, it's wet, it's water, it's cold. It will become hot. It will become, and then he's obviously then extrapolated that and gone a bit further and said it's acidic. So maybe there's a bit of a, I don't know if he's done it on purpose or he almost wants it to be acidic to make it more real. But you have to look at this and say, is this really referring to acidic? And even if it is referring to acidic, the rain can be acidic even naturally and has been throughout many thousands of years.
And rain,
volcanoes and eruptions and all sorts of natural phenomena.
And rain can be hot.
Yeah,
it's not common, but it does happen.
Yes,
it does happen,
and it can happen before Islam, after. There's nothing specific about this. Had it said rain is actually acidic, using those words acidic due to industrialization or
a few more details,
then we can work with that. But an open and vague statement like that, it doesn't really help anyone.
These are signs. يا ابن مسعود إن من علامة الساعة وأشراطها أن تواصل الأطباق وأن تقطع الأرحام. This to me is one of the clear prophetic miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. He said تواصل الأطباق, that the dishes will be communicating continuously, and the Prophet used the very word that's used for satellite communications, muwasalat, and people will sever their family ties. In other words, people will stay home and watch television on satellite dish, and they won't go visit their neighbors.
So now this is the last prophecy that we will deal with, and then we will give the conclusion. But even when I was listening to this prophecy, I was like, wow, how did the Prophet get this one right? Because Hamza Yusuf does give a bit more detail, which is great. And
this one is specific, isn't it?
This one is specific. So I was like, you know what? You got me. So, but luckily we have someone here who can help debunk this so-called prophecy. So if you would like to sort of talk us through
it. Actually, funnily enough, somebody asked me about this quite a few years ago. And I actually looked at it because it seemed rather strange. Yeah. The actual hadith is, indeed, the child will be angry, bad-tempered, and the rain will be hot. Evil will pour out in a flood. The treacherous will be trusted, while the trustworthy will be distrusted. Now, this is how it's always been understood. The strangers, foreigners, will mix, interact with each other, while family relations, ties will be cut.
Right.
And that's what it means. And the word is tawasala al-atbaq. And tawasala means to interact, to communicate, and al-atbaq means tabaq. It comes from tabaq, and tabaqat means layers, stratas, and all the classical explanations for this. For example, in Lisan al-Arab and in Nihaya by Ibn Athir, say that this means al-bu'ada wal-ajanib, which means it's strangers and foreigners and outsiders. So As you can see, the hadith is actually juxtaposing two things. So, for example, it says the treacherous will be trusted, while the trustworthy will be distrusted. And then it says strangers and foreigners will mix and interact with each other, while family will be cut off from each other. Family ties will be cut. So you can see the balance there.
Yeah.
And it's done in this very kind of a typical way of these kind of sort of prophecies, sort of balancing the two.
Yeah.
But what Hamza Yusuf says, and the thing is, I used to be quite fond of Hamza Yusuf, and I've actually met him on a couple of occasions, and I used to respect him highly. And I'm not accusing him of lying, but he's obviously reading into something which isn't there. And so he says, Tawassul al-Atbaq means the communication of dishes, because tabaq can also mean dish. And he says that means satellite dishes, which is just kind of out of the blue and completely out of sync with what the hadith is talking about. As I say, it's juxtaposing good will be bad while bad will be good, old will be servants while young will be masters.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
Can we,
he explains it a couple of times now.
Yeah, can we skip to 1730? It also kind of does quite a good job summarizing, just for like a minute and a half.
Already, there's a very obvious pattern in the prophecies, and that is you put two opposites together. So the mountains will be moved. Mountains are things which don't move. They look very stable. Mountains will be moved. Clothed but unclothed. Humans, like animals. You speak to people that you don't know and you ignore people that you do know, so on and so forth. So if this is the sort of general pattern of prophecy, then you can literally say, people with eyes won't be able to see. People with ears can't hear. People with legs won't be able to walk. And you say, oh, that means wheelchairs. Or you mean, oh, contact lenses. Oh, but hearing aids. You can play these games and you can say these types of statements, but they're very vague. They're very open. There's nothing which we can actually verify any of these statements. And it just seems like a rhetorical sort of device or like a pattern that sounds very profound, but actually is something which like even normal poets or rappers even use in their speech.
The bottom line.
Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah.
It's something that Stops has always said, right? Many Muslims are taught what to think and not how to think. And they would never go and look at that, right, James? That thing with the satellite dishes. Etc. Because obviously it wasn't satellite dishes, and they will just take it to be the case, and they'll run around. And if one person said that in Speaker's Corner, for example, you come back the next week and you'd have 10 of them saying it because they all hear each other's like parrots, just repeating the same thing. And then when you point out that it doesn't, they'll either get upset or walk away or not believe you or whatever. They've never done any of this themselves. It's almost like a virus for the brain, right? It's like the coronavirus for the brain. The brain sort of shuts down. And there's no critical thinking that goes on. Very sad.
Yeah, and it's also even a problem for kind of people who kind of visit Speaker's Corner, and they might end up having a debate with these people. They might not have planned on coming to Speaker's Corner to debate with them, but they might have just like sort of come over, and then one of the preachers will have said, "Oh, do you want to have a chat?" Like maybe Mansur or something. And they might well kind of sort of report one of these things, or like, did you know that the Prophet said that the people will communicate with satellite dishes? And you might, and obviously like you won't have sort of read the original hadith, and so often in order to kind of like there'll be a kind of act of generosity where you might say, okay, let's assume that that's true, and then like kind of you'll continue down the conversation. But that's never actually been. But the rhetorical impact has been established, because if you actually look at the original quotes, you find all these vague things that are kind of like made to look really specific. Like for example, oh, and the rain will be acidic, when in fact you're just saying the rain will be hot. So like there's one more kind of example that I can share my screen to kind of go through.
Let me do that for you. I think the main takeaway there, James, just before you share the screen, is if you ever go to Speaker's Corner, don't accept what Muslims say at face value, right? Ask them for the evidence, because like you say, most of us who are intellectually honest will want to be charitable, but in fact, the charitability with either the disingenuous or the dishonest isn't helpful. It actually, in some sense, plays against you.
Yeah. So another one of so this is like how Hassan Radwan showed the original sort of report and went through it to like examine these claims. Like let's do that here, because this is another kind of sort of reports that's brought forward, but they only bring forward one part of it, and which we'll see. So it starts off, and it's from Sahih Muslim, the Book of Faith, Book 1, Hadith 5 or 4, depending on the numbering system. And it starts off with Abu Hurairah reported that one day the Messenger of Allah appeared before the public, and a man came to him. And it starts off kind of quite slowly, just asking him general questions about Islam, like what is Iman, and Muhammad answers. He keeps on asking like a few more questions, and then it comes to he asks about the Day of Judgment. He said, Messenger of Allah, when would there be the hour of doom? And he replied, the one who is asked about it is no better informed than the inquirer. I, however, narrate some of its signs, and these are: when the slave girl will give birth to her master, then so this is one of the signs. And again, it sounds like the exact same pattern, like, oh, the Day of Judgment won't happen, except this topsy-turvy opposite thing where, the slave girl gives birth to her own master. Whoa, that sounds totally bizarre and totally kind of, the opposite of what you'd expect. How can someone give birth to their own master? And so, this isn't something, and they don't give this as like a miraculous proof, because if you say like kind of, the Day of Judgment will happen, kind of, this is going to happen. Well, in reality, kind of slavery is far, far less prominent or practiced now than any other time in history. So it's kind of just vague nonsense that doesn't look like good evidence for Islam whatsoever. It continues for when the naked barefooted would become the chiefs of the people. And so, like, what is this saying? Like, they're already, from the time that Muhammad was alive, before Muhammad was alive, and until now continuously, there have been tribes where sort of naked barefooted people are led by tribesmen who are themselves like naked and barefooted. So how is this a sign of the hour? Like, this has been going on continuously, but the hour hasn't yet come.
Yeah, but you can see there as well, James, that it's so vague that a Muslim would immediately jump on that. Or one possible thing they could say as well, it's the chiefs of the people, meaning either the Arabs or all the people on the earth, right? Depending on which interpretation you choose to want to take at that moment in time. So it's so vague that it's like an unfalsifiable, because even if they did, they meant, no, well, even if they were the chief of all the people, it means only the chief of the people, and perhaps the people refers to only the Arab Muslims. So whichever way you do it, they can always come up with something that will say, well, it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, exactly. And also on the topic of falsifiability, like so I think this is a good one to add to those kind of 5 criteria of how to distinguish kind of a random guess from a genuine prophecy. Because if someone says the hour won't be established until X, kind of, that's unfalsifiable, because it could not happen for 1,000 years or 10,000 years, and at any point a Muslim could say, oh, but it will come true in the future. So it only gets confirmed or denied when the hour or judgment day actually happens, which of course, like, it's never going to happen. So,
but that's why something like even Harold Camping, which I'm sure you know and some of the viewers know, was a Christian, well, claimed to be a Christian fundamentalist in the US. Talked about the rapture. He gave a specific date for something that's unique. I think he met all the criteria that Stops mentioned there, and of course it was profoundly wrong, so ridiculously wrong. But the crazy thing is that some of his followers, if not all of them, at least some of them, still believed it, and actually, get this, they believed it stronger than before the prophecy, before that happened. After it didn't happen, he was able to convince them, and they were more strongly certain than before. Just think about that for a moment. How can a human brain do that?
Come on, Jehovah's do this all the time.
Yeah. When if you're like the leader of a cult, then if you're going to make a prophecy, if you're a smart cult leader, which kind of successful ones generally are, then you're probably going to only make prophecies that either are basically so far in the future that you aren't going to have to ever sort of fear the consequences of them, or are quite likely to happen anyway. So like when Muhammad said kind of this young boy won't grow old, but the hour will come. He's bullshitting, but he's not going to ever have to face the consequences of that, because he would have said that when he was like 55 or thereabouts. So
yeah, and I'm sure at that stage he never believed, if he existed, by the way, we're taking that he actually existed as it's claimed, but I don't think he even ever thought that his name would live on, or that that a billion plus people would believe this, and it would go on forever. So it was just at that time, right, to make himself sound better and to ingratiate himself to his gullible followers.
Anyway, so it goes on, and this is the part where the people actually pay attention to, so they only quote this part of the hadith, and it goes on to say, these are some of the signs, and when the shepherds of the black, presumably camels, like whatever shepherds generally sort of shepherd or herd, when the shepherds of the black would exalt themselves in buildings, this is one of the signs. And so obviously, like, Muslim apologists would say, oh, this is clearly referring to kind of how in sort of the Arabian Peninsula there have been a lot of kind of tall buildings being built since the 70s or 80s, and like we can like tear this apart in probably like 5 different ways, or so I'll let you guys kind of why do you think
James, this is predicting the Home Office.
Predicting the Home Office. Well, what does the Home Office have to do with the black camels?
Because now you can work in the buildings. You don't have to be outside anymore. Now you can work inside the buildings.
Oh, right. So it's for worldwide, kind of, we're all going to live in tall buildings.
Yeah, but this is the shepherds as well, though, right? So presumably this is the shepherds of the Arabian desert, so it would only apply to them. But again, exalt themselves as a, I'm sure we get somebody like Muhammad or Ahmed or somebody else telling us exactly his interpretation of what exalt means. But again, you could add 10 different meanings of exalt themselves in the buildings anyway. But I want to play for you. I'll get something while James is looking, right? Because when you first read this, James, like this sentence, as you read it, I was looking at this going, okay, what does this mean? But if somebody primes your brain, right, like you are helpfully doing that in a sense, then suddenly whatever your priming is, if it remotely matches what the sentence says, suddenly your brain goes, yeah, of course that's what it means. And I'll see if I can find something. You guys have probably seen it, but maybe the viewers haven't. With David, with Shermer, I can't remember his Michael Shermer, right, who did this at a TED conference. And I'll come back to it maybe if we've got time to show how priming works and how amazing it is. Once suddenly your brain is primed, suddenly everything appears to be exactly what somebody else who tells you about it, then suddenly it becomes clear, right, when it's completely fuzzy prior.
One thing I think that's kind of often not observed about this sort of reports, this hadith, is that when you say that kind of a group of people are going to either compete or exalt themselves in building buildings or even building tall buildings, what you're really saying is that kind of this group of people will kind of become rich at some point in the future, because every single human civilization that has kind of built a stable, prosperous society has started trying to build tall buildings, because America, they have, before the sort of Burj Khalifa or whatever, they had the tallest building in the world, and before that kind of it was Europe who had the tallest buildings in the world, and recently kind of Southeast Asia had the tallest buildings in the world, and in the Middle Ages it maybe was China that might have had the tallest buildings in the world, and in the classical period it would have been maybe Iran or Rome that had the tallest buildings in the world. So like more kind of groups of people have ended up building tall buildings kind of compared to the rest of the world than not. Kind of most groups of people in the world have at some point built tall buildings. So all that's really being predicted is that this group of people at some point in the future, they're going to have like quite a rich society, and given that there is no time horizon, no kind of time limit for this prophecy to come true, because this is only meant to be a sign for the end of the world, kind of this again isn't falsifiable and makes it a far less specific kind kind of time limited in its in the prophecy that's being made. And there's one other kind of interesting thing about this hadith, in that it goes on to say, you know, doom is one of the 5 which no one knows but Allah. And then he, the messenger of Allah, recited the verse, as in the verse from the Quran, verily Allah, with him alone is the knowledge of the hour, and it is he who sends down the rain and knows what is in the wombs, and no person knows whatsoever he shall earn tomorrow, and a person knows not in whatsoever land he shall die. And so this doesn't quote the verse correctly, but basically this hadith is saying that Muhammad is now quoting this sorry, no, it's not this one, it's 31:34. 31:34. Go there. Yes. So let's read it. So the hadith ends with Muhammad quoting this verse from the Quran saying, indeed Allah alone has knowledge of the hour, which we've just been talking about, and sends down the rain and knows what is in the wombs. And so, you know, if you look at classical tafsir, it's saying that only Allah knows when the rains will be sent down. And obviously that's completely false. We're able to, you know, pretty accurately predict, you know, the next week in terms of weather, or very extremely accurately in terms of the next day, since that's the kind of normal time horizon that humans are interested in. And then when you check kind of, and knows what is in the wombs, again, kind of a hadith and classical scholarly commentaries say that kind of, you know, in terms of knowing what's in the womb, it primarily refers to whether it's a boy or a girl, because obviously in ancient times, no one would know what that would be until, you know, the kind of day of delivery, when the baby comes out the wombs. But nowadays, doctors are able to find out what's in the womb, like whether it's a boy or a girl, from very early on, and they're able to tell even more things by using ultrasound. You're able to tell whether a baby has deformities. You're able to tell different diseases that the baby might have from, you know, sort of other tests they can do. So like this just shows I want to show how kind of this is something that kind of the Muslim apologists won't show you in the whole hadith. They won't show you kind of Muhammad saying something kind of patently kind of wrong, that kind of saying that Allah alone has knowledge of these things, when in fact us humans now have knowledge of them. So in all that they'll show you is, oh, and look how miraculous it is. Like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he knew that the Arabs, the Bedouins of the Arabian Peninsula, would build these miraculously tall buildings, and yet kind of they're leaving out all the kind of self-refuting kind of garbage that's wrong. So I know, there you go.
Yeah, it's incredibly vague and cherry picking and so forth as well.
Yeah.
I just want to, if we can, just for 2 minutes, I just want to show you what priming looks like here. Here's the Michael Shermer thing. I've got it off a different YouTube channel, not the TED Talk YouTube, otherwise they might copyright strike us, but here's somebody else's channel who got this. So let me pop this on here and let's listen to this for a moment.
In this case, supposedly these messages are hidden in electronic phenomena. There's a reversespeech.com webpage in which I downloaded this stuff. Here is the forward. This is the most famous one of all of these. Here's the forward version of the very famous song. If there's a bottle in your hedgerow, don't be alone there. It's just a sprinkling for the May Queen. Yes, there are 2 paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. Boy, can you just listen to that all day? All right, here it is backwards, and see if you can hear the hidden messages that are supposedly in there. What'd you get?
Okay, so before anybody does anything, did anybody get any words out of that? If you did,
Yeah,
then
come on, of course.
if you've seen it before, then obviously don't put anything in. But if you've never seen that before, then certainly type in the chat if you heard any words in that playback. And now we'll play the final bit, and here's how they prime your brain. So listen into this now.
I thought this was very obvious.
Okay,
I mean,
well,
I've heard this before, but even when the first time, it was definitely there.
yeah, there's a few things in there. So let's see now. Watch what happens now with your brain now, because for most people there was a lot of gobbledygook there. You might have picked out one or two words, but watch this.
Exactly.
Satan. Okay, well, at least we got Satan. Now I will prime your auditory part of your brain to tell you what you're supposed to hear, and then hear it again.
Wow.
How about that, huh?
It's amazing how stupid our brains are.
But did you see there what happened as you started to read the words?
It made such
Suddenly,
sense.
the sounds that were complete gibberish, suddenly your brain started to go, oh, that actually sounds a little bit like that, right? It's just a psychological technique, right?
Yeah.
And it's exactly what was going back to what you said, James, with these sort of things. As soon as, because a lot of that would be, it's not gibberish in that sense, but it's so vague that doesn't mean anything. As soon as somebody gives an explanation that could vaguely represent what is being talked about there, suddenly, in this case, a Muslim brain would be primed. Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, that was so obvious, right? But it wasn't before.
Isn't that the same as when Muslims claim to have seen certain imagery, like there's a certain tree bent or has grown at a certain angle, and they say, look, this tree is doing ruku, or there are certain fish, there are certain.
Have you seen the one for the toast and the porridge and stuff where the word Allah is written in there in Arabic, right? Like
and a person who cut the tomato, and the person who cut the tomato in half, because that was on an episode of 14 TV probably about 20 years ago. They cut the tomato in half, and the vein of the tomato looked vaguely like it was the word Allah. But that's that for it, where when you see religious iconography in natural things, like I remember in the same episode somebody picked out a pork crackling, and it looked like Mary holding the baby Jesus. It was in the same episode of 14 TV, or like you say, and it looks like Jesus. There's a word for it, but Muslims.
It's all pattern seeking, right?
Muslims
that's different.
To it.
Yeah. And it's just a pattern seeking thing.
Exactly, the pattern,
yeah.
The completion, the form, the shaping. Like you cannot see the inside of a mask. You will always see it as a face. This is what you call this pareidolia effect, where you are trying to complete the shape, especially with faces, because we are so geared towards recognizing faces that it's impossible for us to see a mask and pretend that it's the outside it's looking from the outside to the inside. You will never be able to do that because our brains will not allow that.
Yeah, but it's all part of it, right? And it's just these extra psychological effects, going back to what James said with these sort of vague prophecies, that suddenly, potentially some Muslim brains will be primed, right? And suddenly something that was vague that they wouldn't have come up with themselves, somebody else has told them something, and suddenly, voila, there it all is. I mean, that was just so obvious. How did you miss it? Exactly like that music playing backwards, right?
Okay, so how do you get rid of it?
Critical thinking, in 2 words.
I remember one when I was growing up, Muhammad's name on a piece of wood that came from Noah's Ark. Burn the piece of wood, that's how you get rid of it.
Yeah, I think it's obviously, being more precise, having a very high standard for these sort of things, particularly prophecies, and particularly these vague ones that are in the Quran, etc. Going, hang on a moment, is this the best? I just ask Muslims, and this is always to me. And of course, you'll hear a variety of how the brain tries to kick in to justify. I just ask, is this the best that Allah can do? The creator of the entire universe, of which we are a small part, and this is the best he can do. Sorry,
That's
Mr. or Mrs. Muslim, your standard for Allah is extremely low. Mine is very high. I think if Allah was looking down, he'd look kindly upon me. Although he'd have to still meet my criteria, but he should look kindly upon me because I'm actually exalting him higher than you are. So if he existed, I would be much more, I would hold him to a higher standard because I think he can reach that trivially easily. But obviously, Muslims don't think so.
The interesting thing is science and prophecy, as far in Islamic parlance are concerned, they rely on exactly the same thing for both of them to justify them, and that's interpretation, the miracle of interpretation from the Arabic words.
I was just thinking the same thing, because you have all these science claims which rely exactly on this, where all of a sudden you have some sentence in the Quran and somebody says, well, you see, this is an accurate prediction of what a pulsar looks like. And then you look at the sentence and you think to yourself, excuse me? And then you look what they are actually referring to. And this could be, I don't know, the explosion of a toaster, or it could be anything. And I'm totally flabbergasted when I see what this is based on.
Yeah, I think I've looked into that one. I remember hearing that one in particular, and the verse in the Quran, it just says, and by the knocker, like the word means like knocking, or the one who knocks, and it's like, what it's so vague, and they say, oh, that must mean a pulsar, because pulsars are stars which spin around and they send out radio waves, like electromagnetic radiation, at different at a regular beat. And so that they aren't knocking, they aren't making any sounds, they're sending kind of light or radiation while spinning around. So they'll scrutinize and take a very vague thing and then pretend that it's extremely specific and must be referring to this one thing.
Yeah, because you can cherry pick part of it out there, like you say, right? If there is any radio waves, it isn't just radio waves. There's a lot of other things. So you can cherry pick a little bit out and go, hey, look, it sounds like this. But that, like you say, is not the main feature of it. That's one small part of it. And even if you were to grant that, right, all you're saying is a cherry picking. Again, just hold him to a higher standard. If in fact he is this creator of the universe, he could have done a match. He could have so accurately describe pulsars that we would all have been flabbergasted, and we could all be Muslims now just on that interpretation alone of how accurate that is. Clearly that wasn't the case.
Or like when they say like the mountains, this is an accurate description of how mountains are like holding together the crust, and this is now the root of a mountain, and it's obvious. And then they go and they find a book by some guy who was the advisor, the science advisor to President Reagan 560 years ago. And they say, you see, in his book, Earth, he writes about the root of the mountains. And you say, okay, but what are you basing this on? And they show you this. And then you ask, well, where is the word root? And then you find out in the Quran, it doesn't mention the word root, because it uses the word pegs. And obviously mountains are not pegs. And they just invent the word root just to make it then correspond to what it says in the book Earth for some odd reason. They just, fabricate it out of the blue.
Doesn't the verse also say something along the lines of kind of that the mountains are pegs, and then it implies in that same verse that they're pegs in order to kind of keep the earth firm, something along those lines?
No, and that it stops the shaking of the earth.
Yeah. So they're pegs to stop the earth from shaking. Except that's totally 100% wrong from even like basic kind of geographical knowledge, because every school child who kind of like goes to geography lessons knows that kind of mountains form in areas where you have one continental plate hitting another continental plate, and so they actually form at the places where the earth is the least stable. They're formed as a result of the earth not being firmly set. They form as a result of the two kind of plates pushing into each other and like moving the material up. So they're the opposite of pegs. They're like the result of instability. It's awful. It's dreadful.
But there's lots of examples like this. It's the same thing if you go to a Muslim and you say, okay, where does hijab come from? Well, it says that to draw the cover from your head over your face, over your bosom, to cover. And this is taking the hair cover, because you need to cover your hair, because in the past, the Arabic women always covered their hair. And that's why the Quran refers to it. Then you do the same thing. You say, okay, show me the word hair, please, in the Quran. And it doesn't exist. So again, you have this funny situation that all these things don't even correspond to what they are claiming, that they are just making it up. So it's funny.
About what you when you ask though, kind of how do we stop this kind of thing from happening?
Yes, this is what I would like to know.
Yeah, the only thing I mean, the sort of the specific, you want sort of skepticism and critical thinking in general, and like the kind of particular tools, I guess, would be sort of you know, you'd want anyone who's being brought this kind of evidence, you'd want them to ask, you know, I'd like to see the full report, like the full hadith that this is talking about. And just from that, you'd probably find that the full hadith mentions a bunch of other nonsense in addition to the one sort of vague thing that they're twisting to make it sound specific. And so that alone will do a lot of help. And the second thing that I think kind of, you know, would be kind of enlightening and could help disillusion some of these people would be they should just kind of compare, kind of act, you know, faithfully and like honestly compare kind of Muhammad's supposed prophecies and, you know, predictions and forecasts with someone like Nostradamus, because they'll find the exact same thing, like kind of Nostradamus saying, you know, there'll be a roof over the calamity or something, and then someone else will say, oh look, it's the Twin Towers terrorist attacks, and it would be just the same as like kind of, you know, Muhammad saying kind of, oh the strangers will be kind of distant, and like, oh, he's referring to kind of satellite dishes communicating with each other. So, you know, maybe if they're able to be consistent, they'll see like, okay, like this methodology I'm using to try and find the truth would lead, if I applied it the same way here, I'd end up believing that this pagan Nostradamus is a prophet and has knowledge of the unseen, even though I'm meant to believe that Muhammad is the last prophet who will have knowledge of the unseen. And so, you know, that should maybe kind of give them some cause to thought. But our problem is that kind of these people create new ones all the time. Like they'll create hundreds and hundreds, and you know, like we can like kind of show the process of how to debunk kind of a few of the most common ones, like sort of like maybe the satellite dishes one, or the kind of Arabs building, or the shepherds building buildings. But we can't like debunk all sort of 200 of these kind of, you know, insane kind of deranged things.
But you shouldn't have to, because as soon as he gets one wrong, that's all of them wrong. I mean, the whole point of God making prophecy, because he lives outside of time and he can see into time. He only needs to get one wrong to prove that it's false. I mean, the book of Isaiah makes that challenge anyway, but that's a separate issue. But just going back to your point about Nostradamus, that's what I said last week. The quatrains of Nostradamus, you know, two twins will fall from the sky at 45 degrees with fire. You know, that was the one that many quoted with reference to 911. But you wait for it's after the event, and then somehow you fudge it to make it fit. And that's what's always happened when he put out loads of quatrains, then retrospectively you try to fit one of the quatrains to some kind of world event that's took place and said, yeah, look, he got this right, he got that right. And that's what Muslims do with Muhammad. They wait. It's a bit like the sciences. They wait for something in the science world, or they wait for something in the historical world, and then they look back into the Quran and say, well, let's see if we can make something from the Quran fit the science. Let's see if we could take something from the Quran to make it fit history. The whole point of prophecy, though, is God makes a statement and you're sitting waiting for it to happen. That's the point of prophecy. It's not the case of, well, he says something ambiguous and then you look back and you try and make it fit retrospectively. That's not prophecy.
But as you say, they're doing it even to this day, trying to find new things that are happening and trying to retrofit that to the Quran with these, like, as we say, vague statements, right? So the internet and the 1001 inventions and all these other things that in a sense, are prophecies in a way. And I think Stops went through that many years ago, and you could do like 10 shows just on that nonsense. But again, I think all of this is for gullible minds. I'm not sure that Muhammad ever thought that anybody would follow him, or anybody would believe any of this nonsense after he died, right? But as you say, it's for those minds that are gullible, that are not taught to think critically, and that's my whole thing. It's critical thinking here. And at that moment in time, at the very least, if you're the most charitable human on the planet, you'd have to be agnostic about any of these things, if you didn't want to dismiss them outright. And yet we have, obviously a fair number of people who believe in these things. But I think, again, they're believing it gullibly entirely. They've heard it in the mosque. It's like when I used to be, quote unquote, not a good Christian. Whatever the pastor told me, I thought, okay, well, he's the authority, right? Whatever he says, even if I read that verse, he knows better than me, so I'm going to go and repeat that out. And that's not the ideal way to do it. You'd go and evaluate it as well and see what other people see what you can do to think about it yourselves, look at other sources, etc. But with Muslims, one person hears in the park, and they all say the same thing. So it's like, where are they all getting the same teaching from? Is it Shabir Ali, or is it one of these other guys that they all run around in here and then repeat it to each other?
It depends where they live as to which scholar for $1 they're going to quote. So, I've said time and again, it depends whereabouts in the world you live demographically as to what scholar for $1 you're going to quote, because it's determined by the audience that are listening to you whether they're going to be something supportive or something critical. For instance, you have the Islam that lives in the Muslim-controlled world with its barbaric laws and its attitude towards women and such. But then you have the Islam that lives in the non-Muslim world, which is Islam is a religion of peace, and Islam fights for women's rights. Islam is if you kill one man, you kill all mankind. If you save one man, you saved all mankind. You got that version of Islam. So Islam is determined, if you like, by the location or geographically you live and the influence of Islam in that area.
Yeah, that's definitely partly the case as well.
James Speakers, what video is that with the mountains?
Oh, I posted it it's by a YouTuber called Sharif Gaber, who's currently in jail in Egypt at the moment for producing sort of atheist videos. Yeah, that was the video I just posted in the YouTube chat.
Was it a refutation of
what is it?
It's specifically a refutation about the mountains being pegs verse.
Oh, right, okay. Well, it's in the chat there for people to go and watch. I mean, there's rebuttals, if not outright refutations to all of this sort of stuff, but that won't affect those that are gullible, right? But I guess hopefully what I want to do, and I won't speak for you guys, is really to reach the people who are thinking somewhat critically, who are evaluating all of this stuff, and not just being gullibly taken in by people who sound like they know what they're talking about. That's the people that I hope this show will reach, and other shows like it, like that show and Vidovids and everybody else, right? But because the gullible or the ignorant or the dogmatic, they're not the target audience. They will never be convinced by anything. They're utterly, virtually incoherent or irrational. They will just keep believing in spite of evidence. There's no evidence that would change their mind, and those are not the sort of people that you want to reach or converse with, really.
Yeah.
But the ones that are awake, the ones that are actually quite curious, those are the ones you can reach thanks to the internet. And this is what I'm saying. We were witnessing the collapse of the Soviet Union with its form of communism. And today we are witnessing the collapse of Islam due to the internet, because there are so many people now on the net. Because I remember 10 years ago when I started this, there was hardly anybody out there. Today, it's hundreds of people who are all giving Islam uphill, who are all saying, listen, guys, I don't like your claims because they are false claims. And there are more and more people providing some sort of pushback. And this is the brilliant thing with all this. If you look at all the I mean, there are so many people. I don't know if you know that with this mountain claim, with book by Frank Press, do you know that there are people, because it's a very expensive and very old book, people went and made copies in university libraries, and they put these pages 92, 93, 94 on the internet so you can find them. The same goes for all these claims with prophecies and all the scientific prophecies, because they are so similar, with the barrier in the seas. You can also find all the references that are claimed in the various, especially this clown Zakir Naik, especially what he does. You can find all the references today on the internet, and you can push back on all these claims. This is the beauty of what we have today, and we should use it.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, the more access that people have to it, and the more they start to question things, right? Slowly, the critical thinking. But it's like, going to the gym. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised regularly, and discussion happens a lot. That's what all of us do, and it builds that muscle, that critical thinking muscle. As soon as you hear somebody say something, it's like a red flag that goes off, which maybe 2, 3, or in your case, stops 10 years ago, you might not have had. So it's just like exercising in the gym. Just exercise your critical thinking, debate, discuss with people, listen to it. Think to yourself, what would I have said in that position? That's a great way to do it. So if you have any thoughts on things where you've got an opinion that you feel you can put forward. Obviously, if you don't know anything about, let's say, particle physics or whatever, then you wouldn't know one way or the other, and neither would I, for that matter. But other things where people are making claims, that's one way to do it, right? To exercise the muscle quietly and then put yourself out there, because all of us here have taken flack, and we always will. Anybody who puts them out there, even our interlocutors, right? At least they're brave enough to go out there. Maybe I'd say foolish enough, but brave enough to go out there in one sense. And you're always going to get pushback. So all of us have kind of learned to, and still are, at least I am still, to try and pick up on all of these sort of things that are going on. But if you're not in the game, or if you're not part of it, then it's a muscle that you never really get to exercise very often.
I think
and Marcus, sorry, let me just quickly say, Marcus is making an excellent point here before this rolls out the way again. The most important factor at the moment, really, and this is from the bottom of my heart, I find ex-Muslims. Ex-Muslims are the ones who are driving this. They are the ones who get the most, let's say, vision, the most, I don't know, interest by other Muslims, because they feel closer to them. With me, they will just say, "Oh, you're just an atheist, you're a kafir, that's it, you're useless anyway." But with an ex-Muslim, they used to be part of the group, and now they are turning against this group. And then some Muslims are actually wondering, how come? He was like me. He was actually properly. I mean, somebody like Samir Abdullah. Somebody. I mean, there's lots of people who had channels who were propagating Islam, and now all of a sudden they're turning and they're saying, "Hang on, something has changed." And then some Muslims will think, "Well, how come they have changed? What is it?" Actually, yes, I have the same kind of questions that they are bringing up. And this is what is so important, I think, because I can bring up, counterpoints until the cows come home, and I'm making very little impact. But the same thing from an ex-Muslim, poof. I mean, look at what Apostate Prophet did. I mean, from 0 to 100 in just 8 months, and he's got thousands and thousands of subscribers now.
Yeah. I was thinking the same early on when somebody was chatting about ex-Muslims and the power that they have, right? Because they've been there, they've lived it, they have their experience. They talk from that point, and many people are listening. Go, yeah, that sounds like me. I'm going to listen. And if you listen to, because they sometimes post how people have deconverted, right? And they'll blank out the name and all that sort of stuff for people's safety and the rest of it. But people will say, like, I've read many of them, "Hey, I used to hate you, I used to revile you, whatever, and I started listening, and over time, X, Y, and Z." That would be what for some of the people. Other people would suddenly, it would have clicked for them. So they're making a great impact. And as you say, in one sense, they are the best of creation in that sense, of at least from a critical thinking point of view, and helping people to sort of get out of these bad ideas.
And it's okay. Like, if Mufassir Islam goes back, who cares? It happens that they're still people.
I think with reference to ex-Muslims, it's more than just about being an ex-Muslim, though. It's understanding the language, and more importantly, it's understanding the culture as well, because there's a depth to a community that surpasses the religion. It's the family, it's the relationships you have in the community. It's the community, particularly if you're living in the Western world, because you're when you're isolating yourself as an ex-Muslim, the ostracism that goes with that can be dangerous for some, but it's emotional blackmail and psychological blackmail and such for others as well. So from an ex-Muslim's point of view, you're dealing with more than just coming out of the religion. You're coming out of the community, you're coming out of the culture. And I've said this before many a time, there are many people who claim to be Muslim, but they know it's a load of rubbish. There is no way I could be. I just managed to be one of those. As soon as I was legally old enough to leave home, I left home, and I knew I was leaving the religion behind because I could see what it was. It was a load of rubbish. But then that's because I lived behind the doors. I could see the rabid racism, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Western attitudes that it has. What gets said in the public and what gets said behind those closed doors are two different things. I saw that. I listened to what they had to say about Muhammad and what the contents of the Quran were. As far as I'm concerned, if there is a God, this isn't God. There's nothing of God in what I'm learning here. So leaving home was leaving Islam. But some people, they need to, how can I say, there's in the Quranic reading tonight, it talks about inciting, Muhammad inciting people, and you can incite people in two ways. One of the things that you hear about in the news is inciting to violence. That's where one or two people of strong character motivate a crowd into inciting to a riot or something, right? But there's inciting for good things as well, inciting to love and fine work, so to speak. So in the Muslim community, what it needs is one or two strong people to turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to stand up to you people. And sooner or later, other people will be motivated by that because they themselves know Islam is false. There is no way the majority of Muslims on this planet, assuming that they know what the Quran contains, can actually believe what it contains. See, I would say,
yeah, but why? Why do they lie? I mean, look at the Gog and the Magog. I had a discussion now the other day, and the people are still defending it. How can they? It's crazy.
I know, but I think with some people, they've dug a hole so far deep they can't get out without digging themselves deeper. But I'm not talking about those that are, if you like, defending into apologetics or polemics. I'm talking about the guy that's a security guard over at a certain shop or a certain business, the guy that does the cleaning or something. I'm talking about the layman. He's born a Muslim, he's brought up a Muslim, and he goes through the motions. But in his head, in his heart, when he's put his head on the pillow and he's looking at the world and he's looking at the terrorism and the atrocities, he's looking at the state of the Muslim, he's gone away from to come into the Western world. And he's seen it firsthand. There is no way he can look back home and look at the religion and what Islam has done for mankind and say, yeah, this is truth. All he needs is motivation, or someone that he can look at and say, to motivate me to come out of this. You know, to give him the strength and the courage to come away from what he knows is already false. Because, you know, time and again, I've said this, it's not just the religion that ties people in, it's the culture and the community that tie people in too. So walking away from the religion is one thing, but you're really walking away from the family, the community, the language and the culture. And that can be more painful than walking away from the religion.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing, isn't it, Thunderous? You've hit it there as well. Because it's not just, because if the books were so powerful, you wouldn't require anything else. So there's a whole community built up there. Plus, there's also the idea of, you know, potentially going to hell, because that's drummed in from a young age as well. And so there's a lot of other factors, not just the book itself, which, as you rightly point out, if they read closely enough and use critical thinking, they couldn't possibly still be a Muslim. So it does baffle the mind as to how people who supposedly have read this book and claim to understand it are still Muslims. That's just baffling. But then when you hear the kind of excuses for some of the nonsense in the Quran, you understand that it's just, you can be the smartest person in the world, or you can have a high IQ, but that doesn't mean that you're immune to, you know, cognitive bias and just the brain segmenting itself, right? So, and this happens to everybody, at least at some level, but Muslims are particularly susceptible to it because of the whole culture, the community, etc., etc.
And bear in mind as well that that this is a religion that says if a man leaves the religion, kill him. There is a real fear factor when you're looking in the Muslim world. You've only got to look at, say, was it Saif that we were talking about the other week? He made comments about it's impossible for our women to go to hell, or won't go to hell, because it's impossible to go to hell twice. As a result of making a statement of just being critical of Islam, he's facing 1,000 lashes. He's been inside prison for 5 years. That's just for being observant and saying a fact about the state of Arab women in the Middle East. Leaving Islam is going to get you killed. So
what
there
country
is
was that about the women going to hell?
Saudi Arabia.
Goodness.
Yeah, he said Muslim women will not go to hell because it's impossible for women to go to hell twice. Fantastic statement and so true. However, the point is there's a real fear factor of, if a man leaves his religion, kill him. Tonight's Quranic reading, the verses that we're looking at, one of them is Allah basically saying if the man leaves his Islam, kill him.
Mm.
So there is another factor as well to bear in mind.
I've got
and this James,
I've got
go.
one more sort of Quran prophecy that's sometimes brought forward that I could give a sort of quick sort of skeleton of debunking if that's a good idea.
Yeah,
Go.
we've still got time. Go for it.
Okay, great. So pressing to share the screen again, and so what we have here in front of us, hopefully it's on the screen. I'm reading out Quran chapter 15 verse 9, and it says, we have without doubt sent down the message, and we will assuredly guard it. And then in brackets it says from corruption. And so this is, widely interpreted as a kind of miraculous prophecy and proof of the Quran's divinity. The fact that it's the Quran has been so perfectly preserved, and that it's it's meant to be miraculous that kind of here it says that the Quran will be kind of guarded, and lo and behold, kind of the Quran that people recite today is the exact same Quran, and Muslims have a lot of confidence in this. And so to sort of quickly debunk this, that there's lots of ways of doing it, and so I'm going to be quoting from material that was kind of prepared by Abdullah Samir and Abdullah Gondal in a great sort of presentation, which is kind of I'll post the link to in the chat in a second, or how about I do that kind of right now? But there's going to be a little inception right there. But basically, kind of so like the first way of showing that this is wrong. This is the slides of that presentation that I'll show a couple of things from, because they've gathered lots of different evidence of the fact that the Quran was not sort of perfectly preserved at all. Kind of, I think one of the kind of clearest proofs of this is that kind of it's not well known that kind of there's several different versions of the Quran that exist in the world today, and they aren't all exactly the same in a recitation or how they're written down. And Muslims kind of grudgingly admit this, and they say, oh yes, these are the different recitations. I think they call it qira'at in Arabic, and these are known as, and like the most common Quran is kind of called the Hafs Quran, named after the reciter kind of Hafs. But in North Africa, for example, it's quite common to instead use the Warsh Quran, and they'll explain this away by saying, oh, that there aren't any actual differences. It's just like kind of a difference in pronunciation. It doesn't actually, and just very small differences, and they don't mean anything. They don't have any significantly difference in meaning. And so one proof of this is that one proof that this claim is wrong, that kind of these different recitations of the Quran, which are meant to sort of all be valid, by the way, because they'll claim that the Quran was delivered down to Muhammad in 7 different equally valid ways, 7 different equally valid recitations, and these are meant to all be valid, and they're all the Quran, and they have no significant differences. This is the sort of normal story by kind of mainstream Muslims. And one evidence that this is false is that here it says in chapter 2, verse 148, for each is a direction towards its face. So race to oh, no, wait, this isn't correct. This isn't the right verse. Sorry, let me just check that. So I'm meant to be finding kind of what verse is it? Sorry.
No worries. When you finish,
2:8:4. Okay, sorry.
When you finish this, James, remember I told you about the transmission error, and I don't know if Stops has got the time or is willing to do it now. I've got the verses up, so we could go through it, but I'd show you this as well, which you can go away and have a look at. Right, Stops showed this to a couple of Muslims, and of course they sort of melted when he did that. So remind me when you finish to do that, because that will be other evidence that it hasn't been correctly preserved. Because what you're going into is something that's more kind of, for almost not scholarly, but at a higher level, right? Your average lay Muslim is probably not going to follow anything you're saying here, but it's good that you've got it on screen, so if they are interested, they can follow what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we'll do that. But just to kind of not belabor the point, then so if we go to kind of chapter 2, verse 184, kind of in this chapter, in this verse, this specific verse, you'll find I'm reading right now the Hafs version of the Quran, where it says, "And upon those who are able, a ransom of feeding a poor person," and that's kind of where is it? The Arabic for that is kind of here, and so this Arabic, this says miskeen, okay, and this is in the Hafs Quran. But if you were to look at the Warsh Quran, this word doesn't say a poor person. It has the plural version saying poor people, which is masakin. And so this is a significant difference, because if you actually read the verse, it's talking about if you miss a day of fasting, how should you repent for that? And so this version of the Quran says that if you miss a day of fasting, then as a substitute, you should feed a poor person. So you only need to kind of feed, one poor person in order to make up for this crime. But in the Warsh version of the Quran, which is also an equally valid version of the Quran, instead it says that you should feed, as a substitute, poor people, like masakin. And so this is telling you that this is now an Islamic law issue. In Islamic law, kind of, if you have missed a day of fasting and you need to repent for it, one version of the Quran says that you only need to feed one person, whereas another version of the Quran says that you need to feed poor people. And these are both existing today, and they're both considered equally valid, kind of, uncorrupted versions of the Quran, and yet they kind of contain differences. So yeah, this is kind of a clear, obviously, what is the reasonable explanation here? Kind of, God wouldn't kind of deliver down two versions of a book which say different things in terms of what a punishment should be, because clearly what's actually happened is that the Quran was recited by Muhammad, and his audience, kind of, when they heard him reciting it, some of them heard it one way, others heard it another way, and then then they passed it down, kind of these slightly differing recitations, and now it's kind of clearly not been perfectly preserved by God. It's been corrupted in the way that you would expect humans to kind of not be able to perfectly preserve information. And so this
this one is even worse. This one is even worse because it actually shows the opposite. So the old version says they did not submit, they did not become Muslims, and the 1924, today's standard Quran edition, says yes, they became. So this is a difference where you actually see the opposite of what they are saying is true. So this whole myth of there are no variants is total nonsense.
So what version is in heaven then, and what version in heaven is on earth?
Exactly. I mean, there's entire pages. I found one where they have like 50 or 60 differences, and it's not just the Hafs and the Warsh. Do you know that there are different versions even today if you go to Cairo or to Indonesia? And the most embarrassing thing is, in my eyes anyway, in Kuwait, they were printing 380,000 Qurans in Arabic, the original version, and they found a mistake. And then they had to go and destroy all the Qurans and reprint it. Now, where was Allah when they were doing that? How was he guarding it, which is the claim? He was not guarding it.
They weren't rightly guided, right? They weren't rightly guided.
Well, this is an Islamic country printing an original Islamic Quran, and then they make mistakes in this. So there was no godly guidance here at all. So it was humans who made the mistake, and it was humans finding the mistake. And this is always the point that I'm making. This is exactly what I do with the scribal error. These are people who are making small mistakes, and especially in Arabic, where it's frightfully easy to go from what was the word? If you are defeated or you defeat. This is just two little dots on one of the on one of the words. So it's very easy to omit them, and then you turn the whole sentence into the opposite. So,
well, if you've got the time stops, we've got a few minutes left. If I share screen, can you just go through it? I don't think James has seen it, and I did mention it to him. And it's something obviously he can go away and have a look at.
I was going to include now the chat to see if they want anything else on prophecies. Okay, let's quickly run through the scribal error that I've just mentioned, and in 5 minutes, guys, if you want any questions on prophecies, go ahead, because I want to make this more interactive. Okay. So the way that it works is very simple, because there are several sentences in the Quran, like here in chapter 17. We say there's a command, in other words, decreed, the command that you don't worship except for this God, and then to parents, be good to them. Okay, so parents, good treatment, be kind to parents, blah, blah, blah. So there's different variations in the translations, but there are three elements here. It's a command not to worship anything but Allah, and good to the parents. So these are the three elements that you will find in, I think there's 15 of these sentences in the Quran. So if you take this concept of the three elements, command, don't worship anything else, and to parents, be good to them, and then you look in the Quran and you go to chapter 6, sentence 151, if you read the sentence and you read it the same way, come, I will recite what your Lord has commanded to you. He commands that you don't associate anything with him, and to parents, good treatment. So you have the same three elements. You have what you need to do, and then not associate anything, and to the parents, good treatment. So it's the same principle. So if you put command there, it works. But unfortunately, the Quran says prohibited, and it uses a word that you cannot retranslate or reinterpret because it's haram. And you cannot make haram into something like a command. It is prohibited. So this is quite obvious that a scribe just thought, no, it should be prohibited that you associate something. And this is why the scribe changed it. And then the subsequent scribes all copied it dutifully, word for word, and copied everything down, including the mistake. And this has been done for the last, 1,000 years. And nobody has thought of changing it, because it would be so easy to change the word prohibited into commanded, when it would make sense.
So there we go. Have a look at that, James, in your own time as well, and see what you think of that. But I think, and I think I like the way Stops does it as well, because you change the word prohibited to commanded, and the sentence makes perfect sense. When you put the word prohibited in, then it appears to be the exact opposite of 1723. And what is the conclusion? That most likely, as Stops said, that was just copied incorrectly. It was supposed to be commanded and ended up being prohibited. I'm sure they'll find ways to dodge that, or whatever the case is.
No, they do, because if you change, again, it's a grammar thing. So if you change the grammar, it becomes like, do you know the prohibited city, or the prohibited mosque, or the prohibited this, because people are not allowed there who are non-Muslims. It becomes the sacred city. So if it becomes an adjective, then suddenly you can use haram to extend it into being holy. And then what some translators do, they realize there's a mistake there, and then they change the grammar of the sentence, and then they say it becomes your holy duty. But that doesn't work, because it's not an adjective. So it's quite funny.
But you have to go somewhat into it, don't you? Because the average Muslim was never going to know this. And even those that are reading the Quran, and trying to understand it won't understand it.
Well, the thing is that they have self-correcting glasses. Okay, what they see. Well, we had this with even with Benny. He read this aloud. It is prohibited that you associate anything with him, and he says, "Well, so far so good."
Yeah.
Well, it's not, because he forgot the word "not," which makes it into a double negative. It is prohibited that you not associate anything with him, which becomes a command that you must associate something with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it doesn't make sense. So, okay, guys, any questions regarding prophecies, any comments, anything that you would still like to know? Because I want to get into this habit of, at the end of the show, to ask the people in the chat, because there's 35 people watching. So come on, with 35 people, there must be somebody who has an open thing, or somebody who wants to contribute just to a story or something like this. Come on, there must be something that somebody wants to say or comment or question or something. So be ready the next times. In the end, I always want to try and get there.
What someone in the chat called Thinking asked what we thought the best prophecy in the Quran was.
Best as in
no
most accurate
prophecies.
that isn't true, or what does best mean?
I think he meant the prophecy that comes closest to being, I know, specific, non-vague, but based on the criteria that we outlined kind of earlier in the show.
I think Stops pointed that out, but he can do it again now during the show. But of course, those ones are shown false. You could do one of those, I guess. Was that in the Quran or the Hadith, Stops?
I did. This was Hadith.
It was the Hadith that kind of Stops showed earlier about that the end of the world will come before a boy in front of Muhammad grows old. Last week we went through a kind of a prophecy that's almost specific in the Quran. That's at the beginning of chapter 30, called chapter of the Romans, which says that basically in a nearby land the Byzantines have been defeated, but they will overcome within. And then the scholars at this point can play some tricky tricks where they kind of say, they translate it as they will overcome within 3 to 9 years. Yeah. And so this is kind of shown. This is presented as that, like, oh yeah, look, it's bounded by time. It's saying that a side in a war, the Persian Byzantine war that was going on during Muhammad's life, that a particular side will win this war. So this is a prediction. But then you kind of look at the Arabic and you will see that what they translate as 3 to 9 years actually just says a few years. And then you wonder, why is it that kind of Muhammad? Why is it that Muhammad said? Why is it that rather God, who's speaking and dictating the Quran, who has all the knowledge of the future, says that a side will win within a few years? Like, if it's God, then he should be able to predict the year that the Romans will.
Well, the second, right? Not even the year.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I foresee, though, James, if you go that route, it allows certain, unscrupulous Muslim apologists to kind of shift away from the real target. Because if you say, hey, what the Arabic says is a few years, they will then, it could happen, and I've seen it, right, and I'm sure you have too, they will then go into a long story and explain to you why it's 3 to 9 years. They'll give you some evidence for that might actually sound convincing to a gullible ears. And actually, that's a side point, because really your main point, as you pointed out, is, again, holding God to a higher standard. He could give us the nanosecond for which this would happen, exactly where, with the latitude and longitude, or some version of that, how many people were involved, who killed who, what time, where can we find the bodies? We can go to the place. Presumably, we could find some fossils or whatever the case may be. But that's the main point. So we've just got to sometimes just be aware of how, because, you and I have spoken to so many of them, like, anticipate what sort of and sometimes you can't do it, right? You just can't anticipate how disingenuous people are. But I could foresee it as you were talking. I'm like, okay, based on the experience I've had, I could see a Muslim just sidetracking this and trying to justify the 3 to 9 years, which isn't really the main point, as you pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually even help. It helps the kind of prepared person on our side if it really did say 3 to 9 years, it would be perfect, because then we could say this is a definitively wrong prediction, because in fact the Romans did not win the war within the 3 to 9 year time period. Like in fact, kind of, if you look at the kind of historical reports about the circumstances of revelation of the verse, you'll be able to pinpoint that this verse was delivered after a particular battle that happened in 614 AD, and that the Romans did not, or the Byzantines rather, did not win the war against the Persians until 628 AD. So that's, 14 years rather than 9 years. So like if they do want to really insist that like, oh, but Abu Bakr made a bet with someone, and after within 9 years he claimed that he has won the bet, and so it must mean 3 to 9 years. If they do want to really kind of claim that, then it actually makes it worse for them. But I went through the specific evidence for that in the show last week, in the kind of latter half of the show. So
Yeah,
we did this last week, and this is what I said, what we should expect. Okay, so we should see exactly what battle this was, when it happened, where it was, exactly the coordinates, what the outcome was, who did what, who were the leaders, what were the losses, what was the outcome, and so on. All these things I would expect to be part of a prophecy, and we don't see any of that.
Yeah.
And this is why we said whatever was predicted in the Quran, I think this is actually one of the worst predictions, because it doesn't fulfill any of the requirements. It's totally vague. And number two, come on, if this was really a battle, then it was during the lifetime of the alleged Muhammad's lifetime, and it started and ended, it was in this time period. So where is the prophecy if something happens in my own lifetime? It's not a prophecy.
I think, and the other thing stops is with the Muslim apologists, etc. And I think even our friend, I think James might have been there or knows about it. Even Sabur at one point was doing this in speakers' corners when he had nothing else to do. He wasn't chasing evolution or an atheist. He stood up at one point, and I don't know if James challenged him or somebody else did. He was trying to do the whole thing with the prophecies as well. And I think one of the things that I found useful, and it happened with this other guy on Valley's stream, what's his name, Jamal, whatever his name is, right, is to ask a question. Like, so if they say 3 to 9 years, I would ask the Muslim, even forgetting everything that James so nicely went into, I will just ask the Muslim. It's like a gotcha question in a sense, but it's totally legitimate to ask. And I will say, okay, what is more accurate? Could God have given us the day that it happened and the year? Is that possible? And is that more accurate? Do you think that would have been a better prediction in terms of its accuracy and then the methodology, or a worse one? And they must presumably say, no, it's that is they will not answer the question directly, because to answer it directly and to say no, obviously the particular year or the day would be a better methodology, or a more accurate one is to say that the Quran could be improved, or it's not as good as it should be. And I think that's, for me at least, one way to do it. Just ask them the question and let it hang in midair, because it's just so easy for them to, tug on the rope that's going to sort of hang them metaphorically in that sense anyway.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Because it's for the listeners, right? It's for the listeners as well. That listener will go, oh, hang on a moment, what is more accurate, 3 to 9 years, or 634 BC on the 17th of January? Which is more accurate? Which one do you think would be a more convincing prophecy? And you get the other people, because obviously the interlocutor his mind is going to sort of melt down. He's going to give some babbling response, but it's for those who are listening, I think, is where for me at least, where the power comes in. All yours, sir.
Thunder's. I'm just fascinated with the noises that come out of Thunder's microphone.
Like birds or tweeting in the background.
Frogs and all sorts of things.
He's probably got a Zoom.
Okay, then if there's no questions, if there's nothing, if you really want to, in the description on YouTube, you will see at the bottom, I put the link to the Discord thingamajig server. They call it a server. If you want to chat, I'll be there a couple of minutes. If there are any questions, it's not going to be recorded. It's not available to the outside world. So if you want to speak, then you can.
If you're a Muslim or a non-Muslim, yeah, come and join us there. I'll pop over for a little while as well.
And I'm going to close with the hadith of the week. And it's going to be about a prophecy, lo and behold. And it's from Bukhari 988, number 235, narrated Abu Huraira. Who else? Allah's apostle said, soon the river Euphrates will disclose the treasure of gold. So whoever will be present at that time should not take anything of it. And Al-Araj noted from Abu Huraira that the Prophet said the same, but said, it, the Euphrates, will uncover a mountain of gold under it. Another false prophecy. Well, maybe one day there will be a mountain of gold somewhere underneath or inside the Euphrates River. Who knows? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, people in the chat. It's always good to have people respond and give feedback. And I hope there's going to be next week, there's going to be more questions so that we can get more interaction going between chat people and us. So it's not only us talking down at people, but also people asking and questioning. And it's a pity that the Moor didn't come on, who was adamant in the beginning that he had the answers to the Quran. But
well, I do see he's joined the Discord server. That was at 8:30, so maybe he'll hang around. Maybe we'll find him there. Maybe he wants to speak offline. That's also fine as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Rob, thank you very much. Any last comments, or should we close it down?
Let's just join us on Discord, I think, and we'll pop over there for those of us who are going to join.
Yeah.
Bye,
Good night.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.